In this session, let's focus on one aspect, which is a key aspect of a corporate finance, where the day to day capital requirements, short term capital requirements, or short term investments, either short term borrowings or short term investments, or short term cash flow management. All for that short term based on the day to day operations of that company, we are typically having a management mechanism for that entire thing, and that is what we are calling as the working capital management for the company. So from a company's standpoint, whenever it brings in the concept of working capital, the focus is more towards short term sources of funds and short term spendings. Short term getting funds as well as spending funds. This is what is the aspect of the working capital management altogether. So, the major things that we are looking at from this context are the word called liquidity. How quickly I can get cash from various sources. Let's say I have a big investment. I sell off that investment, I can convert it into cash. So, whenever we are talking of the different sources of liquidity, we are talking about the different sources which can give me the cash, the hard cash, as a part of my business operations. So from there, we are talking about two parts. One is the primary sources, two is the secondary sources. And whenever we are bringing in the primary sources, these are the sources of cash I am generating from my normal operations of the business. Like I have sold something, my customers will pay me cash, right? Or I have done some, I have taken a short term borrowing. I have taken some credit facility from the bank, or I have taken some credit facility from my vendor, which is called as trade credit. I have taken line of credit, which is again a kind of a short term borrowing kind of an instrument where I have got into an agreement with the bank. So all these are typically giving me the various sources of cash. Either I may have my own cash balances, which I get through selling of the goods and various things, or I can also do a very short term borrowings, which could be either in the form of trade credits or line of credit or credit cards or these kind of things where short term borrowings, short term cash can very well be obtained. Or internally, I can have very strong cash flow management practices, probably a very less of credit sales, right? Or probably purchasing the inventory on time, where I am keeping my cash, where I am keeping a large proportion of cash with me, which means I am maintaining a liquidity position to a large extent. But if at all these sources, the primary sources, are not able to generate sufficient amount of cash for me, I am resorting to secondary sources. And what is that I am talking about? As secondary sources, asset sales. Sell off some of my assets. They will also give me cash. But when I sell off those machines, when I sell off those properties, it's actually I'm on a negative side, right? When I'm able to generate the cash through my operations or business, or when I'm able to generate the cash through some short-term borrowings, it looks like a positive mode. I mean, I'm progressing well. But if I'm generating the cash by selling some of my assets, that is also giving me a cash, but probably that I cannot use that machine anymore to develop my business. So my business also can become shorter because I am selling off some of the things which are needed for running my business. So asset sales is another way where I can generate some cash, but it is treated as a slightly non-performing of the company. Even when I do a debt negotiation, what does that mean? Probably I'm going to my lender, to the bank, and renegotiate the debt with him, saying this year I cannot pay. Next year I will pay. Which means because I'm not paying anything this year, I'm left with cash. I don't need to pay interest this year. Or probably I'll have a negotiation with the bank. Next year I'll pay probably at a slightly higher interest rate. Bank, if it agrees. So this year it looks like I'm having sufficient amount of cash with me. But it's not a good sign overall. So the debt renegotiation can happen, or even I can file for a bankruptcy kind of stuff, which can sell off all my existing assets and all, and it can generate some kind of cash in the system. So the secondary sources of liquidity are more indicating negative performance of the company, whereas the primary sources are generated based on the positive move of the company. Right? So to a large extent, we should try to generate liquidity from the primary sources itself rather than a dependence on the secondary sources altogether. And now, what are the various factors I should look at when we are looking at the liquidity position of the company? Two things we have to look at. See, basically, the cash is well managed if I am able to handle my receipts and payments properly. In what way I get my cash, in what way I have to pay my cash. If both these things are handled properly, it is what we are calling as better cash flow management practice. And in that sense, people look at two different ways of creating liquidity. One is drag on liquidity, the other one is pull on liquidity. These two kinds of mechanisms, they create problems with my liquidity issues. What are they? When I say drag, it is nothing but my receipts are not coming on time. Whenever my receipts don't come on time, we say there is a drag on the liquidity. Whenever the payments I make much faster, I say it is a pull on the liquidity. So look at this, cash inflow slack. Means I'm not getting my cash on time. Probably I'm doing a lot of credit sales, right? And each customer is taking his own time in terms of settling that credit sales. So there is a lot of delay in terms of collecting the payments from my customers to whom I have sold on credit. That is where I have a cash flow problem. That kind of cash flow problem is what we are calling as a drag on the liquidity. I'm not able to collect all the credit sale amount, uncollectible. I'm not able to collect it, or there is a very delayed collection of that. And even I've been maintaining lots and lots of inventory in my store without using it. Probably for 2 months it is lying in my store only before I use it for the production. In all these kind of cases, I'm having too much of cash flow problem, especially with respect to the collections, right? Especially with respect to collections and inventories. If there is a delay, we are calling all those kind of issues as drag on liquidity. Whereas if it comes with respect to payments, we are calling it as pull on liquidity. Like I am doing a very early payment, right? Though my vendor says you can pay in 30 days, I am paying it in 10 days itself. Right? Saying they are also shortening my cash position. Probably if I had it for 30 more days, probably I could have done something with that money. So it will not create a cash crisis kind of a situation. Early payments I am doing to the vendors, right? And even the reductions in the credit limits if I am getting. Let's say my vendor is saying, no, I will not give you these many days. You have to complete it within, you have to pay in within 10 days only. If those kind of strong norms are set by the vendors, my cash position is getting much weaker. So, as a part of the working capital management process, we are saying there are three major areas, or probably four major areas. One is cash, and that cash typically generated through three major sources. One is accounts receivables, which is nothing but from my customers, collecting the cash appropriately. Two, accounts payables, which is to my vendors, making payments in an appropriate manner, not too early, not too late kind of stuff. We'll see why, what are the, we will have to look at these three aspects. The third being inventory. Too much of goods in the inventory, too little goods in the inventory. Whenever we talk about working capital management, this is our typical focus. How do I manage each of these aspects? Which, and cash, if I fall short of cash, what will I do? If I have excess cash, what will I do? So this is what is the total nutshell of this chapter. These are the four areas where the focus will be for us. From cash, we are looking at three different sources and uses of cash. And depending on these three numbers, whether it is a surplus or a deficit, how do I typically handle that part? So, any measure of liquidity of a company, how do I measure them? Right? Whether the cash flows of a company are sufficient enough, or will they fall short, or are they very much excess? The way we typically look at all those kind of things is using a couple of ratios. Let's say we are calling them as short-term liquidity ratios, wherein we use two different words, current ratio and quick ratio, where the focus is completely looking at current ratio is focusing on your current assets by current liabilities, right? Which is typically saying, okay, let me take one example that will simplify our total process. Okay, what we are typically looking at is, let's say I want to look at the current ratio. So current assets divided by current liability. So now for each of the companies, I can find out what are their total current assets. So these are my current assets for this company, whereas these are the current liabilities, right? So probably what I can simply do is, if I am saying current ratio, I can do it for both the years. So my current assets are coming out to, let's say I'm doing a comparison analysis 2013 versus 2012. My current assets are 109,248, whereas for the previous year 110,790. These are my current assets. Whereas if I am looking at current liabilities, 68,280, 65,466. Now, when we are talking about current ratio, we are saying current assets divided by current liabilities. So this is around 1.6 here, and this is almost 1.7 in the previous year. What does this mean to me? For if the current assets are what I am going to get within the next 1 year. Current liabilities are what I have to pay within the next 1 year. So, as long as my current assets to current liabilities ratio is more than 1,